In the heart of the Brazilian desert, a lonely man's life changes forever when he witnesses something that shakes him to his core: a young woman being sold to pay her father's debts. What starts as an act of compassion becomes a journey of healing, courage, and unexpected love. But when she disappears, leaving only a letter behind, he must choose between safety and pursuing a truth that could transform them both. This is a story of silent connections and second chances. If you're ready for a tale that will touch your heart, hit that like button, subscribe for more incredible stories, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Let's begin this beautiful journey together. The morning sun carved shadows across João Batista's weathered hands as he tended to his small plot of land. The earth beneath his fingers held the same familiar texture it had for 43 years. Dry, unforgiving, yet somehow loyal. He worked in the rhythm his father had taught him, and his father before that, each movement deliberate and measured. His house stood modest against the endless expanse of the sertão, its adobe walls bearing the scars of countless seasons. Inside, the silence had weight. It pressed against his chest during lonely meals, whispered through empty rooms at night. The photographs on the wooden shelf, his parents, his younger sister who had moved to the city, watched him with familiar eyes that no longer brought comfort, only the ache of absence. João had grown accustomed to speaking only to his goats and the occasional traveling merchant. His voice, when he used it, carried the rust of disuse. The villagers respected him as a man of honor, but distance had grown between him and the world, like vines creeping over an abandoned garden. Each evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon, he felt something stirring within him, a restlessness he couldn't name. It wasn't loneliness exactly, for he had made peace with that years ago. It was something deeper, a pull toward a future he couldn't envision. The leather-bound Bible his mother had left him lay open on his lap, its pages soft from handling. Tonight, he couldn't focus on the words. Instead, his fingers traced the delicate cross pendant his grandmother had pressed into his palm before she died. The only piece of gold he owned, worth more in memory than money. 3 weeks later, the news arrived with Sebastião, the village's unofficial herald. He spoke of an auction, not of land or cattle, but of women, an old custom, he explained, still practiced in the more remote corners when debts grew too heavy and options too few. João's stomach clenched at the words. He had heard whispers of such things, but had always believed them to be cruel stories from a darker time. Yet here was Sebastião speaking of it as casual fact, his yellowed teeth visible in a grin that made João's skin crawl. "Tomorrow morning," Sebastião said, accepting a cup of coffee. "Old customs die hard in these forgotten places. Some women there might prove useful wives if you've got the coin." After Sebastião left, João sat in his kitchen, staring at the ceramic bowl his mother had painted with tiny blue flowers. The coffee grew cold between his palms. Something inside him had shifted the moment those words were spoken. Not desire, but a sense of inevitability, as if destiny had been waiting for this conversation. He walked to his bedroom and opened the wooden chest where he kept his savings, crumpled bills, a few coins, and his grandmother's cross. His entire life's value fit in his cupped hands. The cross caught the lamplight, throwing tiny rainbows. Against the wall, that night sleep eluded him. He stood at his window, watching the stars pierce the vast darkness. The calling he felt wasn't rational, he knew this. But sometimes, his grandmother had told him, the heart knows truths the mind cannot understand. The auction took place in the village square, beneath a canopy of faded fabric that barely shielded the gathering from the merciless sun. João arrived. As the morning light was still soft, his grandmother's cross heavy in his pocket, his life savings in a simple cloth bag. The crowd that assembled made his skin prickle, men with calculating eyes and crude laughter, speaking of the women as if they were livestock. João stood apart, his discomfort growing with each passing moment. He was about to leave when the first woman was brought forward. She was older, her face marked by hardship but defiant. The bidding was swift, cruel. João watched, his hands clenched, as she was led away by a man whose smile never reached his eyes. Then came Maria Lucia. She walked with her head raised, though he could see the tremor in her hands. 19, perhaps 20, with dark hair braided simply and eyes that held depths he recognized. The look of someone who had learned too young that the world could be merciless. Her father, a broken man, stood beside the auctioneer. His words were barely audible as he explained her value: young, healthy, obedient. Each word seemed to carve pieces from his soul, but desperation waited, his voice heavier than shame. The bidding began. João's throat constricted with each cruel comment, each appraising stare. When the first bid came, something crystallized within him. Without thinking, he stepped forward and spoke a number that silenced the crowd. Everything he had, plus his promise to work off the difference. The silence stretched like a held breath. Maria's eyes found his across the dust and judgment, and in that moment he saw not fear, but a flicker of surprise, perhaps even hope. The journey to João's home passed in profound quiet. Maria sat beside him on the cart, her small bundle of possessions clutched in her lap. He could feel her tension like electricity in the air, the way she startled at every sound, every movement. His house, when they arrived, seemed smaller with her presence. She stood in the doorway, taking in the simple furniture, the clean but worn surfaces, the lingering scent of wood smoke and coffee. Her eyes lingered on the photographs, the open Bible, the small details that spoke of a solitary but careful life. "You will have my room," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "I will sleep in the front room." She turned to him then, her first direct look since they had left the village. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. He considered the question, feeling the weight of her cross in his pocket. "Because everyone deserves a safe place to sleep." That evening he prepared a simple meal. Rice, beans, and fresh bread from the village. They ate in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. She seemed to be listening to the sounds of his house, the settling wood, the distant call of night birds, the absence of threat. Before retiring, he placed a key on the table. "For the door," he explained, "so you will know you are safe." She stared at the key for a long moment, then looked up at him with eyes that held questions she wasn't ready to voice. He nodded once and withdrew to his makeshift bed, listening to the soft sounds of her moving about the room that had once been his sanctuary. Tonight, the silence felt different, less heavy, almost hopeful. João woke to silence deeper than usual. The quality of morning light told him he had slept late, unusual for a man whose body knew dawn intimately. He rose from the narrow couch, his back protesting, and walked to the kitchen. The key still lay on the table, beside it a carefully folded piece of paper. His stomach hollowed before he even touched it. The letter was brief, written in handwriting that trembled but remained legible. "Sir João, you showed me kindness I do not deserve. Please forgive me for repaying it with flight. There are shadows that follow me, shadows that would darken your door if I stayed. You are a good man. Do not look for me. Live peacefully. With gratitude, Maria Lucia." He read it 3 times, each reading deepening his understanding. She had not fled from him, but toward something or away from something that she considered more dangerous than the unknown. João walked through his house, noting the small signs of her presence. The bed made with military precision, a water glass washed and placed by the sink, a tiny wildflower left on the windowsill, a gesture of thanks or apology. He couldn't tell which. He sat on his porch, holding the letter. The sertão stretched before him, vast and secretive. Somewhere in that immensity, A young woman was running from shadows he couldn't see, carrying fears he couldn't comprehend. The rational choice was to accept her wishes, to return to his ordered solitude. But as he fingered his grandmother's, in cross, he felt again that pull, that certainty that some paths choose us rather than the reverse. By afternoon, he had made his decision. The investigation began with Father Manuel, a priest who had served the region for 3 decades and knew its stories like scripture. João found him in the small chapel, polishing the brass crucifix with the reverence of daily ritual. Maria, Lucia Santos, the priest repeated, his weathered face creasing with recognition. Yes, I remember her. A bright child, always asking questions about the catechism. Her mother died when she was 12, and the shadows that follow her. Father Manuel set down his cloth, his movements deliberate. Her father owes money to Coronel Santos, no relation despite the surname. The coronel is a man who collects debts in ways that leave marks on the soul. João's hands tightened on his hat. What kind of marks? The priest's silence spoke volumes. When he finally answered, his voice carried the weight of confessions heard, but not forgotten. The kind that make a young woman believe she is worth less than the debt she represents. The next day brought more pieces of the story. From the village seamstress, he learned that Maria had worked extra hours for months, trying to earn money for her family. From the school teacher, he discovered her dream of education cut short when her father's gambling grew too severe. She asked to borrow books, the teacher said, her voice soft with memory. Said she wanted to teach children someday, bright as a star, that one. Each conversation painted a clearer picture. A girl who had shouldered impossible burdens, who had learned to make herself small to avoid notice, who had fled not from kindness, but from the terror that her past might contaminate João's peaceful life. The weight of her sacrifice settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. João's search began at dawn. He traveled light, water, bread, his grandmother's cross, and the letter that had become his compass. The sertão held many hiding places for someone who knew how to disappear, but it also held people who noticed and remembered. His first lead came from a truck driver who remembered giving a ride to a young woman matching Maria's description. Heading toward San Francisco, the man said, accepting the coffee João offered. Quiet girl, paid with coins, like she was counting everyone. The journey stretched across 3 days. João followed traces, a farmer who had seen her walking. At dawn, a shopkeeper who remembered selling her bread and milk, a family who had offered her water and noted the wariness in her eyes. Each step forward filled him with something between hope and trepidation. What would he say when he found her? How could he convince her that some people could be trusted, that safety was possible? On the 3rd evening, as he sheltered in a small pension, the elderly proprietress brought him news. Your daughter, she began, and he didn't correct her. She's staying at the mission 2 days' walk from here. Sister Luz has taken her in. João felt his breath catch. How do you know? She's my daughter. The woman smiled, a knowing expression creasing her face. A father who searches with such determination, who speaks her name with such care, it's written in your eyes. He slept that night with the first peace he had felt since finding the letter. Tomorrow, he would see her again. Tomorrow, he would try to build a bridge across the chasm of fear that had driven her to flight. The mission sat tucked between red hills like a white dove sheltering in cupped hands. Sister Luz, a woman whose age seemed irrelevant beside her piercing kindness, met João at the gate. Senor João, she said, surprising him with her use of his name. She told me you might come. You know why I'm here, Sister Luz began, walking toward the chapel, gesturing for him to follow. That child has been praying for 3 days, not for safety, but for your forgiveness. She believes she has wronged you. Where is she? Teaching the children. It's where she finds peace. They paused at a window overlooking a small courtyard. There, under the shade of an ancient fig tree, Maria sat surrounded by children. She held a slate, drawing letters with patient repetition. Her face, animated in a way João had never seen, glowed with purpose. "She came to us, ready to disappear," Sister Luz said softly. "But children have a way of calling us back to life." João watched, transfixed. This was Maria as she was meant to be. Not fearful, not diminished, but radiant with the joy of sharing knowledge. The contrast to the girl at the auction struck him like a physical blow. "She has nightmares," Sister Luz continued, "about men who come demanding payment. But in the daylight, with books in her hands, she becomes someone else entirely." "Will you let me speak with her?" Sister Luz studied his face with the scrutiny of someone accustomed to reading souls. "On one condition, you must first tell me why you have come." The question hung between them, demanding honesty. João thought of his empty house, his solitary meals, the silence that had grown comfortable until he remembered what conversation felt like. "Because," he said finally, "I have spent my life learning to live alone, and she is teaching me that. Maybe I was learning the wrong lesson." Maria looked up from her slate to find João standing at the edge of the courtyard. The chalk slipped from her fingers, clattering to the ground. The children, sensing the sudden shift in their teachers' attention, turned to stare at the stranger. "Children," Sister Luz said smoothly, "it's time for your afternoon rest." As the little ones filed away, chattering in whispers, Maria rose slowly. She wore a simple dress provided by the mission, but she carried herself differently than she had in his house, straighter, more present. "You came," she said, her voice barely audible. "You asked me not to." "I know." She brushed dust from her skirt, a nervous gesture. "I didn't think you would listen to me." They found themselves in the mission's small garden, where evening primroses released their fragrance into the cooling air. João sat on a stone bench, leaving space for her to choose her distance. She remained standing, her arms wrapped around herself. "The letter explained nothing," he said. Maria's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Some explanations are too heavy to write." "Then tell me now." The words came slowly, painfully. She spoke of the coronel's visits to her father's house, the way his eyes lingered on her, the increasingly specific threats about what would happen if the debt remained unpaid. She spoke of her father's shame, his desperate plan to marry her to the coronel's son, a boy known for his cruelties. "The auction was supposed to be safer," she said, her voice cracking. "My father thought any husband would be, better than what waited for me." João felt rage building in his chest, not at her, but at a world that could create such impossible choices. "And now? What do you fear now?" "That I will bring my shadows to your door, that you will pay the price for my father's debts." "Maria," the name felt important on his tongue, "look at me." She raised her eyes, and he saw in them the same depth that had drawn him at the auction. "I have lived 43 years without fear of any man," he said. "That will not change because I choose to share my life with someone who deserves peace." "You don't understand. I understand that you are more than the sum of another person's debts. I understand that you have dreams worth protecting." He paused, watching her face. "The children here, they see in you what I saw that day, not a burden to be bought, but a teacher, a light." They walked together as dusk painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The mission bells called the hour, their bronze voices carrying across the hills. Maria had been quiet since his last words, processing them with the careful attention of someone unaccustomed to being valued. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. João stopped walking, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Around them, the evening symphony began. Crickets, distant goats, the whisper of wind through drought-hardened leaves. "I want," he said slowly, "for you to have choices. Real choices, made in freedom, not fear. And if I choose to stay here, to disappear completely." The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was certain would hold their weight. João felt his heart contract, but he nodded. "Then I will know you are safe, and that will be enough." Maria turned to face him fully for the first time since he had arrived. "You would let me go, just like that." "Maria, I didn't search for you to capture you. I came to offer you something you've never had, the right to choose your own path." They stood in silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. João thought of his empty house, the photographs on the shelf, the loneliness he had. Thought was his natural state. Then he looked at this young woman whose dreams had been purchased and sold, whose brightness had been dimmed by others' shadows. "I have a proposal," he said. "Come back with me, not as my wife, but as yourself. Help me understand what it means to share a life with another person. Teach me what you're teaching the children here. In return, I'll help you become the teacher you dream of being." Her eyes widened. "You would do that? Without expecting? I expect honesty. I expect respect. I expect that we both understand this is a beginning, not a completion." Maria looked up at the stars, now brilliant in the clear desert sky. "And if the shadows find us? Then we face them, together, but we don't let fear of tomorrow steal today." She was quiet for so long that João began to think she would refuse. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "Yes." The return journey to João's house stretched across 2 days of tentative conversation. They spoke of small things, the weather, the landscape, the birds that followed their cart, but beneath the surface ran currents of deeper understanding. Maria noticed details she had missed in her earlier panic. The care with which João had maintained his father's tools, the way he spoke to his animals with gentle respect, the thoughtfulness with which he rationed their water during the hot afternoon hours. "You've been alone a long time," she observed as they rested under a cluster of huazeiro trees. "Yes," he agreed, offering her a piece of bread. "Long enough to forget how to live with another person's rhythms. I don't know if I ever learned." And they looked at each other across the dry grass, two people acknowledging their mutual unfamiliarity with the map they were trying to draw. When they reached the house, Maria stood again in the doorway, but this time her stance was different. Less like a cornered animal, more like someone choosing to enter. "The room," João said, "is still yours if you want it, or we can arrange things differently." She walked through the small space, touching surfaces she had barely noticed before. The wooden table where they had shared one silent meal, the shelf of books worn soft with reading, the window that looked out over the endless sertão. "I'd like to stay in the room," she said, "but I want to help. With the house, the land, whatever you need." That evening, she joined him in preparing dinner. Their movements around each other were careful, choreographed by mutual respect. When their hands accidentally brushed, reaching for the same pot, neither pulled away quickly. "Tomorrow," João said as they sat with their simple meal, "we can talk about books, about teaching." Maria smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face completely. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that very much." 6 months into their new arrangement, their life had developed its own rhythm. Maria rose early to tend the small garden she had coaxed into existence behind the house, while João worked the larger fields. They shared meals, conversations, and a growing ease with shared space. The transformation in Maria was remarkable. The fearful girl from the auction had evolved into a confident young woman, whose laughter rang across the house like music. She had taken over the household accounts with mathematical precision, organized João's scattered books by subject, and convinced him to let her paint the kitchen walls a cheerful yellow. "The children in the village need a school," she said one evening, looking up from a letter she was writing. "Sister Luz says the government might provide funds if someone qualified applies." João set down his coffee cup. "Someone qualified like you? I haven't finished my education. I would need to take exams, prove my competency. Then we'll find a way to make that happen." The certainty in his voice made her look up sharply. "João, the cost—" "Maria." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "What good is anything I've saved or earned if not to help you achieve your dreams?" Tears gathered in her eyes. In the months of living together, she had learned that João's generosity wasn't calculated but natural, as much a part of him as his careful hands or his gentle way with frightened animals. "You really mean it?" "I've never meant anything more." That night she worked late by lamplight, filling out application forms for teacher certification. João found her asleep at the table near dawn, her head pillowed on her arms. He covered her with a blanket, noting the peaceful expression on her face, so different from the nightmares that had once plagued her. Outside, the sertão stretched toward morning, vast and patient. Inside, two people were building something neither had imagined possible. A life based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the radical idea that love could exist without possession. A year later, Maria stood before her first classroom, facing 20 children whose eyes held the same hunger for knowledge she remembered from her own childhood. The village had indeed provided funds for a school, and she had passed her certification exams with scores that impressed even the skeptical government officials. João had helped her prepare the space, building sturdy desks from local wood, and installing shelves for the books they had slowly collected. Her first salary felt like a miracle in her hands, not because of the money itself, but because it represented work she loved, recognition of her capabilities, independence earned rather than gifted. "Bom dia, crianças," she called to her. "Students," her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Bom dia, Professora Maria," they chorused back, their enthusiasm infectious. As she began the day's lesson on reading, Maria caught sight of João through the window. He was walking past on his way to purchase supplies, and he paused to watch her teach. She saw pride in his expression, but also something deeper, the joy of witnessing someone bloom into their fullest self. Their relationship had continued, evolving. What had begun as mutual respect had deepened into affection, and that affection into love, not the desperate, possessive kind that takes, but the generous kind that gives space to grow. He had never pressured her for more than she was ready to offer. She had never felt obligated to give more than she chose to share. They had learned to read each other's silences, to offer comfort without words, to celebrate small victories with shared glances across the dinner table. "He loves you, you know," Sister Luz had said during one of Maria's visits to the mission. "But more importantly, he loves who you are becoming." Now, watching her students bent over their slates, practicing letters with focused determination, Maria understood what the sister had meant. João's love didn't seek to diminish or control her. It sought to help her become everything she was meant to be. 2 years after their first meeting, João and Maria stood together in the village square where the infamous auction had taken place. The space looked different now, cleaner, more cared for, hosting a festival celebrating the success of the new school. Maria wore the dress she had made herself, deep blue like the evening sky, with small yellow flowers embroidered along the hem. Around her neck hung a chain João had given her, not his grandmother's cross, which remained his private treasure, but a small pendant shaped like an open book. "Do you remember?" she asked, watching the children from her class perform a dance. They had learned when you asked what I wanted from you. I remember you asked me the same question. She smiled, that radiant expression that had become as familiar as morning light. I know my answer now. Joan waited, his attention entirely focused on her words. I want to grow old learning new things about you. I want to wake up every morning knowing that we choose each other fresh, not from obligation, but from joy. I want us to keep becoming better versions of ourselves, together. He took her hand, feeling the calluses she had earned from gardening, from writing, from building their shared life. And I want, he said, to love you exactly as you are, while celebrating everything you're still becoming. Around them, the festival continued its joyful noise. Children laughed, families shared food, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold. But in their small circle of two, time felt suspended, as if the entire universe had paused to witness this moment of recognition. That evening, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the letter she had written the night she fled. I've read this so many times, she said, stopping in the middle of the dusty road, remembering the girl who wrote it, who was so afraid that accepting kindness would bring destruction. Without ceremony, she tore the letter into small pieces and let them scatter on the desert wind. She was protecting us both the only way she knew how, Joan said, watching the paper disappear into the darkness. Yes, Maria agreed. But we've learned better ways now. They continued their walk in comfortable silence, two people who had discovered that the greatest courage sometimes lies not in running from our fears, but in staying to transform them. Above them, the stars bore witness to their journey, from desperate strangers to chosen family, from survival to flourishing, from the shadows of the past to the bright promise of all their tomorrows. The sertão stretched around them, vast and eternal, holding their story like a prayer whispered into the desert night.